The ancient stones of the manor, withered by centuries of Gloucestershire rain and sun, hummed with a quiet history I'd come to know intimately over my 32 years. Stow-on-the-Wold, a village steeped in charm, felt like a living postcard, but our home, nestled on the edge of its winding lanes, was my true sanctuary. It wasn't just a house. It was a sprawling, dignified old place, carved into 3 distinct attached residences, each with its own story etched into its Cotswold stone. My family occupied the largest section, closest to the heart of what felt like our private ancient forest. Our world revolved around the 2 colossal giant sequoias that towered over our garden, silent sentinels that had stood guard for over 2 centuries. They dwarfed everything, their reddish bark textured like elephant hide, their upper branches disappearing into the clouds, whispering secrets to the sky. These magnificent trees weren't just botanical marvels. They were the soul of our property, the very reason the manor had been built where it stood, offering shade and an almost spiritual presence. In the United Kingdom, sequoias of such age and grandeur were exceedingly rare, and these 2 behemoths alone added a significant sum to our home's value, a fact my father would often mention with a mix of pride and awe. Our immediate neighbors were a quiet, kind young couple on one side and an elderly pair on the other, the kind of people who truly understood the rhythms of shared living. We'd even started sharing our small flock of chickens with the older couple, a simple agreement that brought a comforting clucking soundtrack to our mornings and a bounty of fresh eggs. Life was predictable, gentle, and imbued with a sense of enduring peace. Jocelyn Albright had always found comfort in this predictability. My mind, ever observant, absorbed the minutiae of our quiet existence, noticing the subtle shifts in the light through the sequoia branches, the changing calls of the birds, the precise moment the morning dew kissed the lavender. It was a serene existence, one I cherished and perhaps naively believed would continue indefinitely. Then the quiet shifted. The elderly couple, our cherished neighbors, passed away within months of each other. It was a sorrowful time, a loss that rippled through our small community. Their son, an affable man, helped clear out their belongings, and before we knew it, his sister, my own sister Jo, and her family were moving in. Jo, my older sister by 3 years, a force of nature I'd spent my entire life trying to understand or perhaps simply navigate around. From childhood, she'd possessed a certain manipulative charm, a way of bending situations to her will, often at others' expense. I'd always been the quieter, more principled one, the one who saw the strings being pulled even when no one else did. Growing up, I'd often felt overshadowed by her vivacious, demanding personality caught in the undertow of her desires. Now, living next door, that old dynamic began to reassert itself in unsettling ways. The first few weeks were a polite dance of neighborly pleasantries. Jo even agreed to continue the chicken sharing arrangement, a small comfort. But quickly, the cracks began to show. Her nights to tend to the chickens would pass without her remembering to secure them, leaving my parents and me to dash out into the twilight, corralling them back into their coop. It was a minor inconvenience, yet it chipped away at the fragile peace, a subtle sign of her disregard. My observational nature picked up on it immediately. The way she'd offer a fleeting, insincere apology, her eyes already darting to something else, her mind miles away from the simple responsibility she'd agreed to. A knot began to form in my stomach, a familiar tightening that had always accompanied Jo's presence. Then came the incident with the ducks. We had a small, separate pen for our 4 beloved ducks, a personal sanctuary for these comical, waddling creatures. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, we heard a frantic quacking, then silence. A chilling silence. My father rushed out, flashlight in hand, and returned moments later, his face ashen. Jo's children, her 2 boisterous boys, had thought it funny to open the duck pen. By morning, the foxes had done their gruesome work. A mass slaughter. I remember standing there, staring at the empty pen, the scattered feathers, a raw grief tightening my throat. The chickens, not long after, met the same fate. Each loss was a fresh wound, a direct consequence of Jo's casual negligence, or perhaps something more insidious. I watched her reactions, her lack of genuine remorse, and a cold certainty began to settle in my gut. This wasn't just forgetfulness, it was a fundamental disrespect, a burgeoning jealousy that was already beginning to fester beneath the surface. Then came the storm. A fierce, unseasonal tempest that whipped through Stow-on-the-Wold, lashing rain against the window panes and bending the ancient trees. We watched from our living room, mesmerized and a little afraid, as the sequoias swayed like giants in a slow-motion dance. When the winds finally died down and the sun bravely reappeared, we emerged to find one of Jo's sequoias, the one that stood closest to their section of the manor, had somehow succumbed. It lay across their garden, a magnificent tragedy, its roots torn from the earth, its branches splintered. My family felt a pang of sympathy. It was a terrible loss. Jo and her husband were distraught, understandably so, but what began as grief quickly curdled into something far more toxic. "He's so lucky," Jo would say, her voice laced with an unpleasant edge, her eyes narrowed as she gazed at our 2 untouched giants. 2 still standing, ours just fell. The complaints started subtly, then escalated into a relentless torrent. "Your sequoia is casting too much shade on our garden," she declared, despite the fact that our tree stood far enough away to cause no such issue and the English climate hardly suffered from an excess of sun. "It's practically on top of our patio." The accusations grew more outlandish, fueled by a jealousy that pulsed beneath her carefully constructed veneer of civility. I saw it clear as day. My observational nature picked up on every twitch of her lip, every tightening of her jaw, every glint in her eye. She wanted what we had and she resented us for possessing it. The dry threats began to pepper conversations like insidious little darts. "Maybe the next storm will take yours down too," she'd mutter, almost to herself but loud enough for us to hear. "Or maybe someone will just have to chop it down." My parents, ever the optimists, dismissed them as frustrated ramblings, the lamentations of someone who'd lost something precious. "Oh, that's just Joe being Joe," my father would say with a weary sigh. "She's upset, Jocelyn," but I knew better. I'd grown up with Joe's upset. I'd witnessed her schemes, her simmering resentments that always found a way to manifest. The guilt, a slow, creeping vine, began to entangle itself around my heart. I knew Joe, knew the depths of her possessiveness and her capacity for malice, and a cold dread began to fester in my stomach. What if these weren't just empty words? What if they were blueprints? My family decided a holiday to France was in order, a much-needed escape from the simmering tension next door. I tried to relax, to shed the oppressive weight of Joe's unspoken animosity, but my mind kept drifting back to the manor, to the colossal tree, a silent, vulnerable guardian in our absence. I knew the history of Joe's manipulations, the escalation from minor annoyances to outright acts of sabotage. The ducks and chickens had been a prelude, a chilling overture. The guilt that I was privy to her thoughts, her subtle hints, and yet did nothing, ate at me. I was a witness, a silent one, and that silence felt like complicity. We returned to Stow-on-the-Wold 2 weeks later, the long drive from Dover giving way to the familiar rolling hills of Gloucestershire. As our car turned into the gravel driveway, a sudden, sharp intake of breath from my mother pierced the quiet of the evening. My eyes followed hers and my heart slammed against my ribs. There, where the magnificent sequoia had stood sentinel for over 2 centuries, was a gaping, horrifying void. A brutal, defiant 6-meter stump jutted from the earth like a severed limb, surrounded by a churned-up wasteland of mud and debris. Nothing else. The tree was gone. How in the name of all that was sacred did you make a 100-foot, 200-year-old tree vanish in 2 weeks? It was an impossible, grotesque act of erasure. The sheer scale of the operation, the audacity, the brazenness of it was incomprehensible. My mother and sisters began to sob, soft, broken sounds of disbelief and sorrow. My father's face, usually so composed, was beet red, his jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with a fury I rarely saw. 2 of our ancient British oak trees, mere saplings compared to the sequoia but still venerable in their own right, lay crushed beneath the phantom path of the vanished giant. Collateral damage in a monstrous act. We had no evidence. None. Joe, ever the master of manipulation, appeared on her doorstep, feigning shock and concern. "Oh, the storm," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It must have finally taken yours too. We had to get ours cleared up so quickly, it was such a hazard." The lie hung in the air, thick and nauseating. The storm that had taken her tree had passed weeks ago, and our sequoia had weathered it without a scratch. My observational nature screamed at the inconsistencies, at the unnatural speed with which such a colossal tree could be removed. Our security camera at the front of the house, a modern convenience we'd installed years ago, would have captured nothing. You could easily access the back of our property by traversing a few fields, hidden from view. The despair was a suffocating blanket. To lose something so irreplaceable, so vital to the very fabric of our home, was devastating. But the insult was quickly compounded by injury. Within days, a formal letter arrived, a bill for £8,000 addressed to us. Damages to her property, it claimed, caused by the falling sequoia, our sequoia, mind you, the one we were being accused of allowing to fall, and the cost of having our tree chopped up and removed. The sheer audacity of it left us breathless. The wood alone, from a tree of that age and size, would have been worth a small fortune. My principled core raged at the injustice, at the brazenness of her attempt to twist reality to make us pay for a crime committed against us. We had lost hope. The days bled into weeks, each one a torment of quiet grief and impotent rage. The gaping void in our garden mocked us, a permanent scar on the landscape, a monument to a profound betrayal. I walked the grounds every day, my mind replaying the dry threats, the subtle hints, the manipulative gleam in Joe's eye. The guilt festered, a constant ache. I had seen the warning signs, had felt the sinister shift in her jealousy, had been privy to her growing malice, yet I had done nothing concrete. I had convinced myself it was just Joe being Joe, just empty words, clinging to a naive belief that my own sister couldn't possibly be capable of such calculated destruction. That quiet complicity, my silent witnessing, now weighed on me like a physical burden. I yearned for accountability, for a way to expose the truth, but felt utterly helpless. Then 2 weeks after the horrifying discovery, a sudden frantic shout broke the oppressive silence of our home. My father, his face alight with a mixture of disbelief and vindication, came running from the garden, clutching something small and black in his hand. "The wildlife camera," he gasped, breathless. "I forgot all about it. I put it up a few months ago, hoping to catch a glimpse of the badgers." My heart leaped into my throat. The little device, designed to capture the unseen movements of nocturnal creatures, had been fixed to a sturdy oak, strategically placed to overlook a badger set, and coincidentally the area where the sequoia had once stood. We gathered around the computer, a silent, tense huddle, as my father fumbled with the connection. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of time-stamped images, a silent, irrefutable narrative. The first frames showed the serene, moonlit garden. Then men tools, the bright gleam of chainsaws, the brutal, methodical dismantling of our beloved sequoia, piece by agonizing piece. The storm, the fabled storm Joe had blamed, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the footage revealed clear, calm nights, the only disturbance the deliberate, calculated actions of human hands. We watched, transfixed and horrified, as the truth unfolded before our very eyes, a horrifying validation of my deepest fears and a searing condemnation of my sister's deceit. It was all there, every cut, every monstrous chunk of wood being carted away, the exact date, the specific time. And then, clearer than anything else, unmistakable, irrefutable proof. Joe, my sister, standing there directing the operation, her face illuminated by the work lights, a chillingly triumphant smile playing on her lips. She wasn't just complicit, she was the orchestrator, the malicious puppet master. My blood ran cold, a mix of vindication and a profound, sickening sense of familial betrayal washing over me. This was her jealousy, her manipulation, brought to its most destructive conclusion. The guilt, once a slow burn, now erupted into a raging inferno, consuming me with the knowledge of what I had seen, what I had known, and what I had allowed to happen. True accountability, I realized, was no longer a distant wish. It was a desperate, immediate need. I understood then with absolute clarity that this was not just about a tree. It was about principle, it was about truth, and I was going to make sure that truth prevailed no matter the cost, no matter the ties of blood. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. The discovery of the footage ignited a furious energy within our family, a desperate, almost manic resolve to reclaim what had been so cruelly taken. My father, his initial rage now tempered by a cold, calculating determination, was on the phone to our lawyer within minutes. The legal battle ahead loomed like a new, intimidating mountain, but this time we had the undeniable truth on our side. My role as the conflicted insider felt both heavy and strangely empowering. I was the one who had seen Joe's malice blossom, who had heard her whispered threats, who had felt the icy tendrils of her jealousy. Now that intimate knowledge, once a source of guilt, became a sharp, precise tool. I had to ensure her accountability, not just for the sake of the tree, but for the fundamental principle of justice. My principled nature, which had been so stifled by family loyalty and my own internal struggle, now began to guide my every thought. The first step was to quantify the devastation. We called out a renowned tree surgeon, a quiet, scholarly man who walked through the scarred landscape with a reverence that matched our own grief. He knelt by the enormous stump, tracing its rings, his voice hushed with awe and sorrow. This, he explained, his fingers brushing the raw wood, was an original specimen. Brought into the UK in 1860, one of the earliest introductions. There were only 218 around the UK, and now there are only 60. And this one was unique, a particularly robust example. He detailed the staggering impossibility of replacing such a tree. A 200-year-old sequoia simply could not be put in as if it were a sapling. The cost, he estimated, for sourcing and caring for a specimen of even a fraction of its age would be at least £250,000. The number hung in the air, a testament to the magnitude of Joe's crime. My guilt burned, knowing that I had been aware of her growing resentment, her twisted logic, and had not taken proactive steps to protect this irreplaceable piece of history. Then came the engineer. The tree surgeon had advised us to check the foundations, warning that the colossal root system of a sequoia this size could be deeply intertwined with the manor's ancient structure. If the roots, now severed and left to rot, began to decay, they could compromise the very integrity of our home. The engineer arrived with his seismic equipment and blueprints, his face grim as he conducted his assessments. The news was devastating. The roots were indeed deeply embedded, a subterranean network of living cables that had supported the house for over a century. Their decomposition would create voids and shifting pressures, necessitating a complete redoing of the foundations of our entire section of the manor. The cost, another £200,000. My principled mind grappled with the cold, hard numbers. This wasn't just about a tree, it was about the very ground we stood on, literally. It was about securing our home, our future, from the malicious ripples of her actions. Adding to the destruction were our 2 old British oak trees, splintered and crushed. Another £25,000 for their removal and the planting of new, mature replacements. With legal fees, expert consultations, and other smaller claims, the ruined garden, the emotional distress, the outright theft of the valuable timber, the total bill soared past the £500,000 mark. £500,000 for a tree, for jealousy, for a sister's callous disregard. The legal proceedings began, a long, drawn-out nightmare that consumed our lives. Joe, true to her manipulative nature, tried every trick in the book. She claimed innocence, swore it was a natural occurrence, even tried to countersue for the initial £8,000 damages bill. Her lawyer, a slick, smarmy man, echoed her denials, spinning elaborate tales of a second, unnoticed storm and mysterious contractors. The public humiliation of having to lay bare our family dispute in court was excruciating. My parents, though outwardly stoic, bore the weight of public scrutiny with gritted teeth. I, however, felt a profound internal unraveling. My guilt became a physical weight pressing down on my chest, Every lie Joe uttered, every false accusation, every attempt to deflect blame felt like a direct assault on my conscience. I had seen her plan, I had known. And now, watching her brazenly lie in court, I felt the full, crushing weight of my inaction. My observational skills, usually a source of quiet strength, now became a torment. I watched Joe's face, searching for any flicker of remorse, any sign of the sister I once knew, however flawed. There was none. Only a hardening resolve, a cold, calculating gleam in her eyes as she clung to her web of deceit. Her children, bewildered and upset by the court proceedings, would sometimes glance at me, their innocent faces reflecting the confusion of their parents' battle. I avoided their gaze, knowing that I, in my own way, was contributing to their family's downfall. This amplified my guilt, but also solidified my resolve. True accountability wasn't just about punishment. It was about stopping the cycle of manipulation, about restoring integrity to our lives, even if it meant tearing apart the fragile remnants of our family bond. Each day in court was a psychological battle. Joe would glare at me from across the courtroom, a silent accusation in her eyes as if I were the betrayer, not she. She knew I knew. That knowledge, unspoken but palpable, created an invisible tension that hummed between us. My principled nature demanded I speak, demanded I tell the truth of her premeditated malice, but my lawyer advised caution, insisting we present the evidence methodically. The weight was agonizing. My internal monologue became a constant stream of self-recrimination. Why didn't I speak up sooner? Why did I let her words fester? Why didn't I warn my parents more forcefully? The questions echoed in the empty chambers of my mind, amplifying the despair. The financial strain was immense. Though we had a strong case, the legal fees mounted daily. My parents, despite their outward resolve, carried a visible burden. Their faces grew thinner, their movements more tired. The weight of losing the tree, combined with the stress of the lawsuit, was taking its toll. My mother, usually so vibrant, retreated into herself, her laughter replaced by quiet sighs. I watched her, heartbroken, and my resolve solidified. This wasn't just about money. It was about restoring their peace, reclaiming their joy. The sequoia had been more than a tree. It was a symbol of their life together, their legacy. Joe had desecrated that one evening after a particularly draining day in court. Joe cornered me in the grocery store in Stow-on-the-Wold. Her voice, usually so sharp, was laced with a chilling sweetness. "Jocelyn," she began, her hand gripping my arm, her eyes boring into mine. "You always were the quiet one, weren't you? Always watching, always knowing things." My blood ran cold. "You heard me, didn't you? All those little comments, those jokes about the tree. You knew what I was planning, didn't you? And you did nothing." Her grip tightened, her nails digging into my skin. "You stood by, you let it happen, so don't pretend you're so innocent in all this, dear sister. You're just as guilty." The words, though distorted by her malice, struck a raw nerve. Her accusation, however twisted, contained a painful sliver of truth. I had known, I had been a silent witness. The guilt, which had been a simmering undercurrent, now erupted, a scalding wave that threatened to drown me. My breath caught in my throat, my vision blurred. This was my rock bottom. Her casual cruelty, her ability to twist my inaction into complicity, pushed me to the brink. I felt a profound moment of personal collapse, standing there exposed, utterly devastated. My principled nature recoiled from her manipulation, but my guilt-ridden heart acknowledged the truth in her barb. For a long moment, I simply stood there, numb, feeling the cold tiles beneath my feet, the fluorescent lights harsh above my head. But then slowly a different feeling began to assert itself. A cold, hard resolve. She was right. I had been too passive. I had been too afraid to challenge her, too consumed by a misguided sense of family loyalty. But her accusation, delivered with such venom, had inadvertently clarified everything. My guilt shifted. It was no longer about what I hadn't done. It was about what I would do. True accountability, I realized, wasn't just about exposing her. It was about actively participating in her downfall, ensuring that every shred of justice was pursued. My passive role as the conflicted insider transformed into an active, unwavering commitment to principle. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily. The transformation was profound, a quiet internal shift that hardened my resolve like tempered steel. Joe's venomous words in the grocery store, intended to break me, had instead forged me anew. The guilt, which had been a suffocating weight, now morphed into a burning fuel, propelling me forward with an unwavering focus on true accountability. I was no longer the conflicted insider, I was the principled architect of justice. My observational nature, once a silent burden, now became my greatest asset, allowing me to foresee Joe's next move, to understand the intricacies of her deceit, and to meticulously plan her undoing. The court case reached its crescendo. Our lawyer, armed with the engineer's meticulous reports and the tree surgeon's expert testimony, laid out the full scale of the destruction and the staggering costs. Joe and her lawyer scoffed, attempting to poke holes in the evidence, clinging to their fabricated storm narrative. They underestimated us, and crucially, they underestimated the devastating power of irrefutable truth. The moment arrived for the piece de resistance, the wildlife camera footage. My father, with a solemn dignity, uploaded the video onto the large screen in the courtroom. The air crackled with anticipation. Joe across the aisle maintained her practiced smirk, a mask of confident denial. But as the first clear image of the moonlit garden appeared, then the figures of men with chainsaws, her smirk faltered. Her eyes, which had been so sharp and defiant, began to dart frantically. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, broken only by the whirring of the projector. Frame by agonizing frame, the deliberate malicious destruction of our beloved sequoia unfolded. The precise cuts, the methodical hauling away of the massive sections of timber, the unblemished night sky devoid of any storm. And then the undeniable, damning climax. The clear, focused image of Jo, my own sister, standing there directing the operation, her face illuminated, a chillingly triumphant smile on her lips. It was a smile I had seen countless times throughout our childhood, a smile of quiet victory after some petty manipulative triumph. Now it was a smile of pure, unadulterated malice, caught forever on digital record. The gasp that rippled through the courtroom was audible. Jo's face, which moments before had been a picture of smug confidence, drained of all color. Her jaw went slack. Her lawyer, who had been meticulously taking notes, stopped cold, his pen hovering uselessly above his pad. The camera even captured the moment she spoke to one of the cutters, leaning in, her words inaudible but her gestures unmistakable, pointing, overseeing. The silence that followed the end of the footage was even more profound than before. It was a silence of shock, of undeniable truth. Jo, utterly defeated, slumped in her seat, her shoulders slumping, her facade crumbling. Her lawyer, pale and visibly shaken, asked for an immediate recess. There was no defense left, no argument, no lie that could withstand the cold, hard reality of those images. The truth, meticulously observed and patiently documented, had finally devastatingly served its purpose. When court reconvened just an hour later, Jo's lawyer stood. His voice, usually so booming, was barely a whisper. "Your Honor," he said, clearing his throat, "my clients concede they will not contest the damages." He then rattled off the numbers: the £250,000 for the sequoia replacement, even if impossible, the £200,000 for the foundations, the £25,000 for the oaks, plus the various smaller claims. The total, just over £500,000. It was a staggering sum, a life-altering judgment. The immediate aftermath was a blur of legal formalities. Jo and her family were ordered to pay the full amount. Their only viable option was to sell their section of the manor. They had a second home, a smaller property nestled deep in the Cotswolds, a fact I had observed and catalogued long ago. A quiet contingency in my mind if ever Jo's envy reached its inevitable breaking point. It was a cold comfort knowing they wouldn't be truly destitute, but the humiliation, the forced retreat from a life they had coveted, was its own form of potent justice. Watching them pack, seeing their furniture being loaded into removal vans, was a complex mix of emotions. My principled mind acknowledged the necessity of the outcome, the true accountability that had finally been achieved. But the guilt, though diminished, still lingered. This was my sister, after all. A part of me, the part that remembered childhood games and shared secrets, felt a pang of sorrow for the absolute fracturing of our family. Yet another part, the one that remembered the slain ducks, the casual cruelty, and the brazen destruction of something irreplaceable, found a quiet, almost grim satisfaction. The scars on the landscape of our garden mirrored the scars on our family, but now at least the wound was being cleaned. The sequoia cutters, those men who had carried out Jo's destructive command, actually approached us later. They were genuinely contrite, explaining they'd been hired under false pretenses, told it was a dangerous, storm-felled tree that needed immediate removal. They offered us a peace offering, a way to make amends for their unwitting complicity. They would fashion countertops and a large dining table from the recovered wood of our ancient sequoia, free of charge. It was a strangely poignant gesture, turning the symbol of our loss into a tangible piece of our home, a way to reclaim something from the ashes of destruction. My observant nature picked up on their genuine remorse, their deep regret for their role, however unwitting. And it allowed me for the first time to see a path to healing. With the £500,000, our lives transformed. The mortgage, a financial anchor that had weighed on my parents for decades, was paid off, a burden lifted. The ancient foundations were meticulously repaired, a slow, painstaking process that ensured the manor's integrity for centuries to come. We embarked on a dream renovation, a beautiful loft conversion that opened up soaring new spaces and a bright modern kitchen where the sequoia countertops now gleamed. A constant, beautiful reminder of what had been lost and what had been reclaimed. The garden, too, was lovingly restored, new oaks planted in place of the crushed ones. The most significant change, however, was the new sequoia we planted in the back garden. Not a 200-year-old giant, of course, but a vibrant 60-year-old specimen, already tall and majestic, a symbol of hope and renewal. We carefully chose its spot, ensuring it would have room to grow, to reach for the sky undisturbed. Watching it take root, knowing it was part of a new beginning, brought a quiet, profound sense of peace. My principled core found solace in this act of rebuilding, of reinvesting in the very beauty that had been so cruelly taken. The new family who moved into Jo's old section of the manor were everything she wasn't. They were warm, genuinely friendly, and cherished the quiet community spirit of Stow-on-the-Wold. We quickly fell into a comfortable rhythm, sharing our chickens and ducks, even adding some adorable pygmy goats to the mix. Their children were polite and well-behaved, and I often found myself babysitting, a quiet joy that brought a new, gentle rhythm to my days. A stark contrast to the emotional turmoil Jo's children had wrought. Life had come full circle, but not without profound, irreversible changes. The silence of our home was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful, filled with the gentle clucking of chickens and the quiet hum of contentment. My guilt, once a consuming fire, had softened into a quiet understanding. I had been a silent witness, yes, but in the end I had acted. I had ensured true accountability, not just for the tree, but for the principle of justice, for the sanctity of our home and our family's peace. The revenge wasn't about bitterness, it was about restoration, about setting things right. It was a hard-won peace born from the crucible of betrayal, but it was peace nonetheless. And for me, Jocelyn Albright, the quiet, observant one, the principled and once guilt-ridden insider, the journey had been transformative. I had seen the true cost of unchecked jealousy, but also the enduring power of truth and the quiet strength of resolve. Justice, I realized, was not always swift, nor was it always clean. But when achieved, it could bring a profound, if sometimes bittersweet, sense of closure. Subscribe to Tales of Revenge channel for new revenge stories daily.